Georgia is a country in Eastern Europe and West Asia. It is part of the Caucasus region, bounded by the Black Sea to the west, Russia to the north and northeast, Turkey to the southwest, Armenia to the south, and Azerbaijan to the southeast. Georgia covers an area of 69,700 square kilometers, or 26,900 square miles. It has a population of 3.7 million, of which over a third live in the capital and largest city, Tbilisi. Georgians, who are native to the region, constitute a majority of the country's population and are its titular nation. Georgia has been inhabited since prehistory, hosting the world's earliest known sites of winemaking, gold mining, and textiles. The classical era saw the emergence of several kingdoms, such as Chalkis and Iberia, that formed the nucleus of the modern Georgian state. In the early 4th century, Georgians officially adopted Christianity, which contributed to their unification under the Kingdom of Georgia. Georgia reached its golden age during the High Middle Ages under the reigns of King David IV and Queen Tamar. Beginning in the 15th century, the kingdom declined and disintegrated under pressure from various regional powers, including the Mongols, the Ottoman Empire, and Persia, before being gradually annexed into the Russian Empire starting in 1801. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, Georgia briefly emerged as an independent republic under German protection, but was invaded and annexed by the Red Army in 1921, becoming one of the republics of the Soviet Union. In the 1980s, an independence movement grew quickly, leading to Georgia's secession from the Soviet Union in April 1991. For much of the subsequent decade, the country endured economic crises, political instability, and secessionist wars in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Following the peaceful Rose Revolution in 2003, Georgia strongly pursued a pro-Western foreign policy, introducing a series of democratic and economic reforms aimed at integration into the European Union and NATO. This Western orientation led to worsening relations with Russia, culminating in the Russo-Georgian War of 2008 and continued Russian occupation of parts of Georgia. Georgia is a representative democracy governed as a unitary parliamentary republic. It is a developing country with a very high Human Development Index and an emerging market economy. Sweeping economic reforms since 2003 have resulted in one of the freest business climates in the world, greater economic freedom and transparency, and among the fastest rates of GDP growth. In 2018, Georgia became the second country to legalize cannabis, and the first former socialist state to do so. Georgia is a member of numerous international organizations, including the Council of Europe, Eurocontrol, BSEC, Guam, Energy Community. As part of the association trio, Georgia is an official candidate for membership in the European Union. Since October 2024, Georgia is immersed in a deep political crisis. Etymology. Names of Georgia. Ancient Greeks, Strabo, Herodotus, Plutarch, Homer, etc., and Romans, Titus Livius, Tacitus, etc., referred to early Western Georgians as Chalkians and Eastern Georgians as Iberians, Iberoi, Beta Aetero Omicron Iota in some Greek sources. The first mention of the name Georgia is in Italian on the Mappa Mundi of Pietro Visconti dated 1320. At the early stage of its appearance in the Latin world, the name was often spelled Georgia. Lore-based theories were given by traveler Jacques de Vitry, who explained the name's origin by the popularity of Saint George among Georgians, while Jean Chardin thought that Georgia came from the Greek gamma epsilon omega rho gamma, tiller of the land. These centuries-old explanations for the word Georgia/Georgians are now mostly rejected by the scholarly community, who point to the Persian word Gurg/Gurgan, wolf, as the likely root of the word. Under this hypothesis, the same Persian root was later adopted in numerous other languages, including Slavic and West European languages. The native name is Sakardvelo, land of Kartvelians, derived from the core central Georgian region of Kartli, recorded from the 9th century, and in extended usage referring to the entire medieval kingdom of Georgia prior to the 13th century. The Georgian circumfix saxo is a standard geographic construction designating the area where X dwell, where X is an ethnonym. The self-designation used by ethnic Georgians is Kartvelibi, i.e., Kartvelians, first attested in the Lay-Sun inscription found in the Old City of Jerusalem. The medieval Georgian chronicles present an eponymous ancestor of the Kartvelians, Kartlos, a great-grandson of Japheth who medieval chroniclers believed to have been the root of the local name of their kingdom. However, scholars agree that the word Kartli is derived from the Karts, a Proto-Kartvelian tribe that emerged as a dominant regional group in ancient times. The name Sakartvelo consists of two parts. Its root, Kartveli, specifies an inhabitant of the core Central Eastern Georgian region of Kartli, or Iberia as it is known in sources of the Eastern Roman Empire. State name. The official name of the country is Georgia per Article 2 of the Georgian Constitution, adopted in 1995. In Georgia's two official languages, Georgian and Abkhaz, the country is named Sakartvelo and Krttila, respectively. Prior to the adoption of the Constitution in 1995 and following the dissolution of the USSR, the country was officially called the Republic of Georgia. Several languages continue to use the Russian variant of the country's name, Gruzia, which the Georgian authorities have sought to replace through diplomatic campaigns. Since 2006, Israel, Japan, South Korea and Hungary officially changed their appellation of the country to variants of the English Georgia. In 2020, Lithuania became the first country in the world to adopt Sakartvelas in all official communications. History. Prehistory. The oldest traces of archaic humans in what is now Georgia date from approximately 1.8 million years ago in the form of the Dmanisi hominins, a subspecies of Homo erectus representing the oldest known fossils of hominins in Eurasia. Buffered by the Caucasus and benefiting from the Black Sea ecosystem, the region seems to have served as a refugium throughout the Pleistocene, while the first continuous primitive settlements date back to the Middle Paleolithic, close to 200,000 years ago. During the Upper Paleolithic, settlements developed mostly in western Georgia, in the valleys of the Rioni and Kurila rivers. Signs of agriculture date back to at least the 6th millennium BC, especially in western Georgia, while the Mtkvari Basin became stably populated in the 5th millennium BC, as evidenced with the rise of various cultures closely associated with the Fertile Crescent, including the Trialetian Mesolithic, the Shilavri Shoma culture, and the Layla Tepe culture. Archaeological findings show that settlements in modern-day Georgia were responsible for the first use of fibers, possibly for clothing, more than 34,000 years ago, the first cases of viticulture, 7th millennium BC, better source needed, and the first signs of gold mining, 3rd millennium BC. The Karairaxes, Trialeti, and Chalkian cultures coincided with the development of Proto-Kartvelian tribes that may have come from Anatolia during the expansion of the Hittite Empire, including the Mushki, Laz, and Bizars. Some historians have suggested that the collapse of the Hittite world in the Late Bronze Age led to an expansion of the influence of these tribes to the Mediterranean Sea, notably with the Kingdom of Table. Antiquity. The classical period saw the rise of a number of Georgian states, including Chalkis in western Georgia, where Greek mythology located the golden fleece sought after by the Argonauts. Archaeological evidence points to a wealthy kingdom in Chalkis as early as the 14th century BC and an extensive trade network with Greek colonies on the eastern Black Sea shore, such as Dioscurias and Phasis, though the entire region would be annexed first by Pontus and then by the Roman Republic in the 1st century BC. Eastern Georgia remained a decentralized mosaic of various clans, ruled by individual mamosoclaci, until the 4th century BC when it was conquered by Alexander the Great, eventually leading to the creation of the Kingdom of Iberia under the protectorate of the Seleucid Empire, an early example of advanced state organization under one king and an aristocratic hierarchy. Various wars with the Roman Empire, Parthia, and Armenia made Iberia regularly change its allegiance, though it remained a Roman client state for most of its history. In 337, King Mirian III adopted Christianity as the state religion of Iberia, beginning the Christianization of the Western Caucasus region and solidly anchoring it in Rome's sphere of influence by abandoning the ancient Georgian polytheistic religion heavily influenced by Zoroastrianism. However, the Peace of Acilisene in 384 formalized the Sasanian control over the entire Caucasus, though Christian rulers of Iberia sought to rebel at times, leading to devastating wars in the 5th–6th centuries. Most famously under the rule of King Vakhtang Gorgasali, who expanded Iberia to its largest historical extent by capturing all of western Georgia and building a new capital in Tbilisi. Medieval unification of Georgia. In 580, the Sasanian Empire abolished the Kingdom of Iberia, leading to the disintegration of its constituent territories into various feudal regions by the early Middle Ages. The Roman-Persian Wars plunged the region into chaos, with both Persia and Constantinople supporting various warring factions in the Caucasus. However, the Byzantine Empire was able to establish control over Georgian territories by the end of the 6th century, ruling Iberia indirectly through a local Kuropalates. In 645, the Arabs invaded southeastern Georgia, starting an extended period of Muslim domination in the region. This also led to the establishment of several feudal states seeking independence from each other, such as the Emirate of Tbilisi and the Principality of Kakheti. Western Georgia remained mostly a Byzantine protectorate, especially following the Lazark War. The lack of a central government in Georgia allowed the rise of the Bagrationi dynasty in the early 9th century. Consolidating lands in the southwestern region of Tauclargeti, Prince Ashit I, 813–830. Used infighting between Arab governors to expand his influence to Iberia and was recognized as presiding prince of Iberia by both the Abbasid Caliphate and the Byzantine Empire. Though Ashit's descendants formed competing princely lines, Adarnase IV managed to unify most Georgian lands, except for Kakheti and Abkhazia, and was crowned king of the Iberians in 888. Restoring the monarchy abolished 3 centuries prior. In western Georgia, the Kingdom of Abkhazia benefited from the weakening of Byzantium in the region to unify various tribes and become one of the most powerful states of the Caucasus in the 8th century. In the 9th to 10th centuries, Abkhazia grew its influence through several military campaigns and came to control much of Iberia and competing with the Bagrationi. Dynastic conflicts eventually weakened Abkhazia in the second half of the 10th century, while in Tauclargeti, Prince David III used his influence within Byzantine Anatolia to empower the Bagrationi. Bagrat III, heir of the Bagrationi dynasty, successively became king of Abkhazia, 978, prince of Tauclargeti, 1000, and king of the Iberians, 1008. Allowing him to unify most Georgian feudal states and be crowned in 1010 as King of Georgia. Golden Age and division. For much of the 11th century, the nascent Georgian kingdom experienced geopolitical and internal difficulties, with various noble factions opposed to the centralization of the Georgian state. They were often backed by the Byzantine Empire, which feared a dominion of the Caucasus region by the Bagrationi dynasty, and in some instances fueled internal conflict through aristocratic families seeking more power. However, ties between Byzantium and Georgia were normalized when the two countries faced a new common enemy, the rising Seljuk Empire in the 1060s. Following the decisive Byzantine defeat at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, Constantinople started to retreat from eastern Anatolia and entrusted Georgia with its administration, placing Georgia at the forefront of Turkish in the 1080s. The Kingdom of Georgia reached its zenith in the 12th to early 13th centuries. This period during the reigns of David IV, r. 1089 to 1125, and his great-granddaughter Tamar, r. 1184 to 1213, has been widely termed as the Georgian Golden Age. This early Georgian Renaissance, which preceded its Western European analogue, was characterized by impressive military victories, territorial expansion, and a cultural renaissance in architecture, literature, philosophy, and the sciences. The Golden Age of Georgia left a legacy of great cathedrals, romantic poetry and literature, and the epic poem The Knight in the Panther's Skin, considered a national epic. David IV suppressed dissent of feudal lords and centralized power in his hands to effectively deal with foreign threats. In 1121, he decisively defeated much larger Turkish armies during the Battle of Didgori and abolished the Emirate of Tbilisi. The 29-year reign of Tamar, the first female ruler of Georgia, is considered the most successful in Georgian history. Tamar was given the title King of Kings and succeeded in neutralizing her opposition, while embarking on an energetic foreign policy aided by the downfall of the rival powers of the Seljuks and Byzantium. Supported by a powerful military elite, Tamar was able to build on the successes of her predecessors to consolidate an empire that dominated the Caucasus and extended over large parts of present-day Azerbaijan, Armenia, eastern Turkey, and northern Iran, and used the vacuum of power left by the Fourth Crusade to create the Empire of Trebizond as a Georgian vassal state. The revival of the Kingdom of Georgia was set back after Tbilisi was captured and destroyed by the Khwarezmian leader Jalal ad-Din in 1226, followed by devastating invasions by Mongol ruler Genghis Khan. The Mongols were expelled by George V the Brilliant, r. 1299–1302. Known for reuniting eastern and western Georgia and restoring the country's previous strength and Christian culture. After his death, local rulers fought for their independence from central Georgian rule, until the total disintegration of the kingdom in the 15th century. Georgia was further weakened by several disastrous invasions by Timur. Invasions continued, giving the kingdom no time for restoration, with both Kara Koyunlu and Aq Koyunlu Turkomans constantly raiding its southern provinces. Tripartite division. The Kingdom of Georgia collapsed into anarchy by 1466 and fragmented into 3 independent kingdoms and 5 semi-independent principalities. Neighboring large empires subsequently exploited the internal division of the weakened country, and beginning in the 16th century, various Ottoman and Iranian forces subjugated western and eastern regions of Georgia, respectively. This pushed local Georgian rulers to seek closer ties with Russia. In 1649, the Kingdom of Imereti sent ambassadors to the Russian royal court, with Russia returning the favor in 1651. In the presence of these ambassadors, Alexander III of Imereti swore an oath of allegiance to Tsar Alexis of Russia on behalf of Imereti. Subsequent rulers also sought assistance from Pope Innocent XII but without success. The rulers of regions that remained partly autonomous organized rebellions on various occasions. As a result of incessant Ottoman, Persian wars and deportations, the population of Georgia dwindled to 784,700 inhabitants at the end of the 18th century. Eastern Georgia, composed of the regions of Kartli and Kakheti, had been under Iranian suzerainty since the Peace of Amasya signed with neighboring rivaling Ottoman Turkey, Safavid Georgia. With the death of Nader Shah in 1747, both kingdoms broke free and were reunified through a personal union under the energetic King Heraclius II, who succeeded in stabilizing eastern Georgia to a degree. In 1783, Russia and the eastern Georgian kingdom of Kartli-Kakheti signed the Treaty of Georgievsk, which made eastern Georgia a protectorate of Russia, guaranteed its territorial integrity and the continuation of its reigning Bagrationi dynasty in return for prerogatives in the conduct of Georgian foreign affairs. Despite its commitment to defend Georgia, Russia rendered no assistance when the Iranians invaded in 1795, capturing and sacking Tbilisi and massacring its inhabitants. Although Russia initiated a punitive campaign against Persia in 1796, the Russian imperial authorities subsequently violated key promises of the Georgievsk Treaty and in 1801 proceeded to annex eastern Georgia, while abolishing the Georgian royal Bagrationi dynasty, as well as the autocephaly of the Georgian Orthodox Church. Pyotr Bagration, one of the descendants of the abolished House of Bagrationi, later joined the Russian army and became a prominent general in the Napoleonic Wars. Within the Russian Empire. On December 22, 1800, Tsar Paul I of Russia, at the alleged request of the Georgian King George XII, signed the proclamation on the incorporation of Georgia, Kartli, within the Russian Empire, which was finalized by a decree on January 8, 1801, and confirmed by Tsar Alexander I on September 12, 1801. The Bagrationi royal family was deported from the kingdom. The Georgian envoy in St. Petersburg reacted with a note of protest that was presented to the Russian vice-chancellor, Prince Kurakin. In May 1801, under the oversight of General Karl Heinrich von Noring, Imperial Russia transferred power in eastern Georgia to the government headed by General Ivan Petrovich Lazarev. The Georgian nobility did not accept the decree until April 12, 1802, when Noring assembled the nobility at the Sioni Cathedral and forced them to take an oath on the imperial crown of Russia. Those who disagreed were temporarily arrested. In the summer of 1805, Russian troops on the Askarani River near Zagam defeated the Iranian army during the 1804–13 Russo-Persian War and saved Tbilisi from reconquest now that it was officially part of the imperial territories. Russian suzerainty over eastern Georgia was officially finalized with Iran in 1813 following the Treaty of Gulistan. Following the annexation of eastern Georgia, the western Georgian kingdom of Imereti was annexed by Tsar Alexander I. The last Imeretian king and the last Georgian Bagrationi ruler, Solomon II, died in exile in 1815, after attempts to rally people against Russia and to enlist foreign support against the latter had been in vain. From 1803 to 1878, as a result of numerous Russian wars now against Ottoman Turkey, several of Georgia's previously lost territories, such as Ajara, were recovered, and also incorporated into the empire. The Principality of Guria was abolished and incorporated into the empire in 1829, while Svaneti was gradually annexed in 1858. Mingrelia, although a Russian protectorate since 1803, was not absorbed until 1867. Russian rule offered the Georgians security from external threats, but it was also often heavy-handed and insensitive. By the late 19th century, discontent with the Russian authorities grew into a national revival movement led by Ilya Shavshavadze. This period also brought social and economic change to Georgia, with new social classes emerging. The emancipation of the serfs freed many peasants but did little to alleviate their poverty. The growth of capitalism created an urban working class in Georgia. Both peasants and workers found expression for their discontent through revolts and strikes, culminating in the Revolution of 1905. Their cause was championed by the socialist Mensheviks, who became the dominant political force in Georgia in the final years of Russian rule. Declaration of Independence. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Transcaucasian Democratic Federative Republic was established with Nikolai Chkits acting as its president. The federation consisted of three nations, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. As the Ottomans advanced into the Caucasian territories of the crumbling Russian Empire, Georgia declared independence on May 26, 1918. The Menshevik Social Democratic Party of Georgia won the parliamentary election and its leader, No Zordania, became prime minister. Despite the Soviet takeover, Zordania was recognized as the legitimate head of the Georgian government by France, UK, Belgium, and Poland through the 1930s. The 1918 Georgian-Armenian War, which erupted over parts of disputed provinces between Armenia and Georgia populated mostly by Armenians, ended because of British intervention. In 1918 to 1919, Georgian General Georgy Mazniashvili led an attack against the White Army led by Moiseev and Denikin to claim the Black Sea coastline from Tuapse to Sochi and Adler for independent Georgia. In 1920, Soviet Russia recognized Georgia's independence with the Treaty of Moscow. But the recognition proved to be of little value, as the Red Army invaded Georgia in 1921 and formally annexed it into the Soviet Union in 1922. Soviet Socialist Republic. In February 1921, during the Russian Civil War, the Red Army advanced into Georgia and brought the local Bolsheviks to power. The Georgian army was defeated, and the Social Democratic government fled the country. On February 25, 1921, the Red Army entered Tbilisi and established a government of workers and peasants Soviets with Philip Makaradze as acting head of state. Georgia was incorporated into what would soon become the Soviet Union. Soviet rule was firmly established only after local insurrections were defeated. Georgia would remain an unindustrialized periphery of the USSR until the first five-year plan, 1928 to 1932, when it became a major center for textile goods. Joseph Stalin, an ethnic Georgian, was prominent among the Bolsheviks, ultimately becoming the de facto leader of the Soviet Union from 1924 until his death on March 5, 1953. Fellow Georgians such as Lavrentiy Beria and Vsevolod Merkulov likewise held powerful positions in the Soviet government. Stalin's Great Purge between 1936 and 1938 led to thousands of Georgian dissidents, intellectuals, and other presumed threats to Soviet authority being executed or sent to Gulag penal labor camps, severely truncating the nation's cultural and intellectual life. During World War II, Germany led an Axis invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 with the aim of conquering all territory up to the Ural Mountains. As the initial operation stalled, the Axis launched the Fall Blau offensive in 1942 to take control of strategic Caucasian oil fields and munitions factories. Ultimately, Axis troops were stopped before reaching Georgian borders. Over 700,000 Georgians, constituting about 20% of the population, fought in the Red Army to repel the invaders and advance towards Berlin. An estimated 350,000 were killed. After Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev became the leader of the Soviet Union and implemented a policy of de-Stalinization. Khrushchev's purges were met with riots in Tbilisi that had to be dispersed by military force. This violent turn of events that compromised Georgian loyalty to the Soviet Union, contributing to the nation's consolidation. 1978 Georgian demonstrations saw the return of mass anti-Soviet protests, but this time government backed down. Throughout the remainder of the Soviet period, Georgia's economy continued to grow and experience significant improvement, though it increasingly exhibited blatant corruption and alienation of the government from the people. With the beginning of perestroika in 1986, the Georgian Soviet leadership proved so incapable of handling the changes that most Georgians, including rank-and-file communists, concluded that the only way forward was a break from the existing Soviet system. Independence, civil wars. Starting in 1988, mass protests erupted in Georgia in favor of independence, led by Georgian nationalists such as Merab Kostava and Zviad Gamsakhurdia. The following year, the brutal suppression by Soviet forces of a large peaceful demonstration held in Tbilisi on 4 to 9 April 1989 proved to be a pivotal event in discrediting the continuation of Soviet rule over the country. In October 1990, the first multi-party elections were held in Soviet Georgia, which were the first multi-party elections in the entire Soviet Union, in which the opposition groups were registered as formal political parties. The Round Table, Free Georgia coalition led by Zviad Gamsakhurdia secured victory in this election and formed a new government. On April 9, 1991, shortly before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Supreme Council of Georgia declared independence, after a referendum held on March 31. Georgia was the first non-Baltic republic of the Soviet Union to officially declare independence, with Romania becoming the first country to recognize Georgia in August 1991. On May 26, Gamsakhurdia was elected president in the first presidential election with 86.5% of the vote on a turnout of over 83%. Gamsakhurdia was soon deposed in a bloody coup d'état, from December 22, 1991 to January 6, 1992. The coup was instigated by part of the National Guard and a paramilitary organization called Mkhitaryan, Horsemen. The country then became embroiled in a bitter civil war, which lasted until December 1993. Simmering disputes within two regions of Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, between local separatists and the majority Georgian populations, erupted into widespread interethnic violence and wars. Supported by Russia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia achieved de facto independence from Georgia, with Georgia retaining control only in small areas of the disputed territories. Eduard Shevardnadze, Soviet Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1985 to 1991, was named as the head of Georgia's new government in March 1992 and was elected as head of state in that year's elections, later as president in 1995. During the war in Abkhazia, 1992 to 1993, roughly 230,000 to 250,000 Georgians were expelled from Abkhazia by Abkhaz separatists and North Caucasian militants, including Chechens. Around 23,000 Georgians fled South Ossetia. In 1994, Georgia was facing an economic crisis, with severe shortages of basics such as bread, water, electricity and heat. Rose Revolution. In 2003, Shevardnadze, who won re-election in 2000, was deposed by the Rose Revolution, after Georgian opposition and international monitors asserted that the November 2, 2003 parliamentary elections were marred by fraud. The revolution was led by Mikhail Saakashvili, Zurab Zvania and Nino Burjanadze, former members and leaders of Shevardnadze's ruling party. Mikhail Saakashvili was elected as president of Georgia in 2004. Following the Rose Revolution, a series of reforms were launched to strengthen the country's military and economic capabilities, as well as to reorient its foreign policy westwards. The new government's efforts to reassert Georgian authority in the southwestern autonomous Republic of Adjara led to a major crisis in 2004. The country's newly pro-Western stance, along with accusations of Georgian involvement in the Second Chechen War, resulted in a severe deterioration of relations with Russia, fueled also by Russia's open assistance and support to the two secessionist areas. Despite these increasingly difficult relations, in May 2005 Georgia and Russia reached a bilateral agreement by which Russian military bases, dating back to the Soviet era, in Batumi and Akalkalaki were withdrawn. Russia withdrew all personnel and equipment from these sites by December 2007 while failing to withdraw from the Gudauta base in Abkhazia, which it was required to vacate after the adoption of the Adapted Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty during the 1999 Istanbul Summit. Russo-Georgian War. After tense relations between Georgia and separatists in Abkhazia and South Ossetia ever since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, 1991. Relations between Russia and Georgia severely deteriorated into the April 2008 Russo-Georgian diplomatic crisis. The Russo-Georgian War, 1–16 August 2008, resulted in parts of Abkhazia and South Ossetia being, still, under control of Russian-backed separatists, with Russian military bases being established in those regions, and Russia, according to the European Court of Human Rights, having direct control over those separatist regions. A bomb explosion on August 1, 2008 targeted a car transporting Georgian peacekeepers. South Ossetians were responsible for instigating this incident, which marked the opening of hostilities and injured 5 Georgian servicemen. Then several South Ossetian militiamen were killed by snipers. South Ossetian separatists began shelling Georgian villages on August 1. These artillery bombardments caused Georgian servicemen to return fire periodically. On August 7, 2008, the Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili announced a unilateral ceasefire and called for peace talks. More attacks on Georgian villages, located in the South Ossetian conflict zone, were soon matched with gunfire from Georgian troops, who then proceeded to move in the direction of the capital of the self-proclaimed Republic of South Ossetia, Tskhinvali, on the night of August 8, reaching its center in the morning of August 8. According to Russian military expert Pavel Felgenhauer, the Ossetian provocation was aimed at triggering Georgian retaliation, which was needed as a pretext for a Russian military invasion. According to Georgian intelligence and several Russian media reports, parts of the regular, non-peacekeeping, Russian army had already moved to South Ossetian territory through the Roki Tunnel before the Georgian military action. Russia accused Georgia of aggression against South Ossetia and began a large land, air, and sea invasion of Georgia under the pretext of a peace enforcement operation on August 8, 2008. Abkhaz forces opened a second front on August 9 with the Battle of the Kodary Valley, an attack on the Kodary Gorge, held by Georgia. Tskhinvali was seized by the Russian military by August 10. Russian forces occupied Georgian cities beyond the disputed territories. During the conflict, there was a campaign of ethnic cleansing against Georgians in South Ossetia, including destruction of Georgian settlements after the war had ended. The war displaced 192,000 people, and while many were able to return to their homes after the war, 1 year later, around 30,000 ethnic Georgians remained displaced. In an interview published in Kommersant, South Ossetian leader Eduard Kokoity said he would not allow Georgians to return. The President of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, negotiated a ceasefire agreement on August 12, 2008. Russia recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia as separate republics on August 26. The Georgian government severed diplomatic relations with Russia. Russian forces left the buffer areas bordering Abkhazia and South Ossetia on October 8, and the European Union monitoring mission in Georgia was dispatched to the buffer areas. Since the war, Georgia has maintained that Abkhazia and South Ossetia are occupied Georgian territories. Georgian Dream Government, 2012-present. In preparation for the 2012 parliamentary elections, Georgia implemented constitutional reforms to switch to a parliamentary democracy, moving executive powers from the president to the prime minister. The transition was set to start with the 2012 parliamentary elections and to be completed with the 2013 presidential elections. The 2012 Georgian parliamentary election marked the defeat of the United National Movement and the victory of the Georgian Dream Party, the first peaceful electoral transfer of power in Georgia. The first year marked the contentious cohabitation period between the new Georgian Dream government and President Saakashvili, who retained his post until the presidential election in October 2013. Georgy Margvelashvili, nominated by Georgian Dream, won the election and succeeded Saakashvili, furthering solidifying the power of Georgian Dream. Bidzina Ivanishvili, a businessman who founded the Georgian Dream, served as its first prime minister before resigning in 2013. However, he continued to be the most influential person within the party, despite not holding any position until 2018. As for Saakashvili, he left Georgia shortly after the 2013 election and was convicted in 2018 in absentia on corruption charges and abuse of power, which he denied. Saakashvili continued to be the chairman of the United National Movement Party from abroad, which now became the main opposition party. Georgian Dream won the 2016 parliamentary elections, achieving a constitutional supermajority of 115 out of 150 seats. In the 2018 presidential election, the Georgian Dream Party backed independent Salome Zurabishvili, who won in the second round, becoming the first woman in Georgia to hold the office in full capacity. This was the last direct election of a Georgian president, as additional constitutional reforms removed the popular vote. In 2019, the protests erupted over the visit of Russian MP Sergei Gavrilov and his participation in the Interparliamentary Assembly on Orthodoxy. The protesters demanded the electoral reform to change the mixed proportional majoritarian voting system, which they alleged greatly benefited the ruling party in the 2016 election. The ruling party conceded on some demands and condemned Gavrilov's visit. After international mediation to overcome the deep political crisis in the run-up to the 2020 parliamentary elections, an amended electoral system was adopted, specifically for those elections. As a result of the lowered threshold, 9 parties were elected to parliament. Georgian Dream secured 48% of the votes, nearly the same as 4 years earlier, which translated into 90 out of 150 seats due to the more proportional electoral system with a highly reduced number of majoritarian districts. However, the opposition made accusations of fraud, triggering another round of political crisis, lasting months. The opposition and protesting citizens demanded a new vote. The political crisis was temporarily resolved by an EU-brokered agreement in April 2021, from which both the ruling Georgian Dream and the opposition United National Movement withdrew a few months later. During the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Georgia provided diplomatic and humanitarian support for Ukraine but did not join other countries in imposing sanctions on Russia. Since the beginning of the war, Georgia has topped the list of countries to which Russian exiles moved. Russians, just like many foreigners, were allowed to stay in Georgia for 1 year without a visa, though many Georgians began to view the presence of more Russian citizens in Georgia as a security risk. Shortly after the outbreak of the war, Georgia applied for membership of the EU at the same time as Ukraine and Moldova. While the latter two received the candidate status a few months later, Georgia was given preconditions to receive the candidate status, which predominantly focused on judicial reforms, rule of law, de-oligarchization, and addressing the highly polarized political and media climate. In the following months, the relations with the European Union worsened and the Georgian Dream Party turned from the pro-European Social Democratic one into the Eurosceptic and socially conservative party. In March 2023, Georgian Dream attempted to adopt the law on transparency of foreign influence, which requires non-governmental organizations, NGOs, to register as agents of foreign influence if they receive more than 20% of their funding from abroad. However, the discussions of the bill were termined amidst the protests and the pressure from the U.S. State Department, United Nations, and European Union. Nevertheless, the similar bill was reintroduced in April 2024 and adopted in the next month. In December 2023, despite not having fulfilled most preconditions, Georgia was granted the EU candidate status. Instead, these criteria and additional ones, such as free and fair 2024 parliamentary elections, were made conditional for Georgia to move ahead to the actual accession talks. The alleged irregularities and fraud in the October 26, 2024 Georgian parliamentary elections led to a protracted political crisis and the protests. The crisis was further exacerbated after Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze announced the temporary suspension of the accession process of Georgia's EU membership until 2028, citing blackmail. Another round of political crisis developed amidst the inauguration of the ruling party candidate Mikhail Kavalashvili as the new president by the Parliamentary Electoral College, which the previous president Salome Zurabishvili, who went into opposition to the ruling party during the 2020 to 2021 Georgian political crisis, described as illegitimate and refused to recognize the transfer of power.